In order to understand the philosophical underpinnings of natural law theory as an ethical theory, it's worthwhile to briefly explore the development of this theory. How did it come to be that philosophers were claiming that we could discover the right ways of living? We could discover what was the moral thing to do by studying and understanding the natural order of things. And we can see philosophers grappling with this kind of question at least as far back as Aristotle in 340-ish BC. And there's indication that there were other philosophers that preceded Aristotle, who we would call the pre-Socratics, the early ancient philosophers in Western civilization who were living before Socrates. Okay, so philosophers like Parmenides and Zeno and Pythagoras, and that they were grappling with this question as well. Natural law theory as an ethical theory gets its most fully developed expression in the 13th century with Thomas Aquinas and his work called Summa Theologica, which is this massive work of philosophy in which Aquinas lays out what he believes to be the natural order of creation, what that order seems to indicate about the intentions of the creator, and what the implications of that are for how we should live. Now, what's important to recognize is that these philosophers were doing all of this work related to ethics based on an understanding of the natural order of things without the benefit of science, right? Modern science and all of its technologies and tools didn't exist for these early philosophers. So they were working off of what their unaided assumptions or unaided observations were of the way that things seem to be, and then making deductions about what that indicates about the nature of creation and what would then be the implications for how we should live. Now, natural law theory in its sort of modern expression really starts to occur during the Enlightenment period of the 16th and 17th centuries in Europe. And we ordinarily, or I shouldn't say ordinarily, we commonly think that science and religion are antagonistic to one another, that they're incompatibles, or even hostile to one another. And what's really interesting, or what I think is interesting, is that when science began to develop during the Enlightenment period, it was relying on those early scientists accepting four very key Judeo-Christian beliefs in order to make science possible. Okay, so rather than science being antagonistic to religion, it's the embracing of some fundamental religious principles that allows science to actually develop. One of those principles is this: time is linear and it's quantifiable. There's a past, there's a present, and there's a future. Time is not just cyclical. The universe had a beginning. Okay, we now know that we now call that the Big Bang. But of course, in the 16th and 17th centuries, they didn't know anything about the Big Bang. What they knew about was the story of Genesis, right? That is this account of creation where the universe and all of its things come into being. And everything that comes into being is moving on a path, right? Everything is progressing towards fulfilling its purpose. That's the story of the Judeo-Christian sacred text. And what this does is it allows these early scientists to say, well, if everything is progressing towards its purpose, then we should probably figure out what things are like and how things seem to be so that we can understand what their purpose is and what our purpose is. And if things really are moving towards their purpose and they're progressing, right, that's the key word here. It's not that things are just static, and it's not that things have no point and aren't going anywhere. Things are actually moving toward their purpose. And that gives us reason to believe that we should not surrender to complacency and believe that history repeats itself and that there's no time's arrow, or we should reject this idea that, everything is happening in one direction and at some point it'll stop and it'll retreat in the opposite direction, and just keeps doing that over and over infinitum, right? So time is linear, it's quantifiable, and everything is progressing toward the fulfillment of its purpose. Therefore, science can be useful for understanding what the nature of the things that exist are.